Now that we've configured our iSCSI settings and policies, we can apply those to a virtual NIC. Now typically what we want to do is we want to apply those settings to a vNIC template and then use the template to create those virtual NICs. So in this nugget we're going to take a look at creating a vNIC template, and we're going to apply the VLANs and the settings, the policies that we've already created to that vNIC template. We also want to take things into consideration such as jumbo frames and fabric failover. Within UCS Manager we want to be on the LAN tab, and we come down to Policies. By expanding that, we can scroll down and find that vNIC templates is an option. We can expand that and take a look at what we've already configured, or we can just right click on this and say create vNIC template. Now we want to give this vNIC template a name. We'll call it iSCSI-A. And the reason for the -A is because we're going to need to create a template for both fabrics, for fabric A and fabric B. So the first setting we want to make sure is that the correct fabric is set, and then we want to consider this failover concept. So here's how it works. We have two fabric interconnects, fabric interconnect A and fabric interconnect B, and they both have connection up to the network. And so the question is, what happens if one of these fabric interconnects goes down? And what happens is dependent on whether this box is checked, enable failover. Because if it is enabled, failover is enabled, the vNIC that is pinned to fabric interconnect A will swing over and get a connection to fabric interconnect B. And we cover this in more detail in the UCS Advanced Networking skill. So if you haven't checked that one out, be sure to give it a look and make sure that this concept of fabric failover is fully understood. So in our case, the question is, this sounds great, but what happens if we have a second vNIC that's pinned to B, and the hypervisor, which sees both of these, whatever our hypervisor is taking a look at the fact that, okay, I've got these two different vNICs, and I'm running iSCSI multipathing between these two vNICs. If that's the case, I don't necessarily need fabric failover to be enabled. So in our case, we're going to go ahead and leave fabric failover disabled. And that's not to say that that's the right decision for all environments, so just be aware of the technology before deciding what the failover policy should be. From here, we can scroll down and we see this concept of initial versus updating template. Now we've covered this throughout several of our UCS skills, so just as a quick reminder, an initial template, well, any template really, is going to spawn these vNICs. So once we've created these vNICs out of this template, we're going to have a lot of these in production. And the question is if it's an initial or an updating template versus updating. So if an initial template and I make a change to the template itself, then it just affects the template. There are no bonds between the template and the vNIC. However, if it's an updating template, those changes will be propagated down. So the decision needs to be made between an initial template, which is probably the lower risk of an option because an accidental disruptive change to an updating template could cause us problems in production, versus the updating template, which gives us a lot of convenience and time saving, because if we have 200 of these vNICs out there that we need to make a change to, and we use an updating template, it makes it really easy to push those changes down. From here is where we want to apply the configuration settings that we've already done. So for example, we're going to apply VLAN 15 that we created a couple nuggets ago as part of the same skill. And we have to decide whether it's going to be a native VLAN or not, meaning whether it's going to be tagged to the host. So if our hypervisor is going to tag the traffic, we want to leave this unchecked. In our case, we'll go ahead and check it. We'll assume that when we configure the hypervisor portion of this configuration, that we will enable VLAN 15 to be the native VLAN for this connection. So scrolling down here as we continue to explore, okay, so MTU would be the jumbo frames. Keeping in mind that we enable jumbo frames on the network side within the QoS policy settings, and that's good, but we actually have to enable it here on the vNIC itself as well. Now, if you'll recall, we say, okay, well, I remember in the QoS settings, we made this 9216. But the problem is that that's actually too high of a number for the vNIC itself. The vNIC itself only allows a configuration of up to 9,000 bytes, which is pretty typical in the industry from a jumbo frame perspective. It says right there in the warning message. So we're going to make it 9,000. And what this allows is for the network to handle any other kind of overhead that gets tacked onto these frames. 9,000 gives us a buffer of 216 bytes. Now the MAC pool, we configured this as part of a different UCS skill actually, the UCS network configuration skill. So if you need a refresher on how MAC pools are made, or if you haven't actually made these yet in your environment, you might need to cancel out and go make those. But we'll just pick MAC-A, the pool that was created for Fabric A, and the QoS policy that we just defined is QoS-iSCSI. So we've configured all these. In fact, it pops up and says exactly the warning that we just discussed. that the MTU really does need to match between the two. We've enabled jumbo frames down here in the QoS policy, but we need to make sure that we enable it here as well. And with that, we can click OK, and we've created our first template. And then we just want to create the same template for Fabric B. The vNIC template is where all of the iSCSI configurations and settings come together that we've created up until this point. For example, we want to apply the VLAN and the QoS settings, and the MTU need to match what those QoS settings are in the QoS policy that we've applied. We also want to decide about that Fabric failover and decide whether to enable that or not. Plus, the type of template is important. We need to decide between an initial and updating template as well. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.